AI based or the general technology based. I mean, it's not only AI, right? It's digital in general. It's cars now, electric vehicles, and other areas where it seems like Europe is falling behind. But maybe you can hear some comments from any of you.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the AI governance issues. That's kind of that Europe has been like really vocal in drafting the AI regulations, how to make sure the advanced AI is secure and used for for the benefit of humanity rather than like dominated by big tech companies. And I think it has a lot of I think this like EU effect is still there based on my observation. There are a lot of conversations are led by European countries and players in China and the US also participate like very actively in this type of conversation. So if you think about the edge of like Europe in this AI development, and I think the regulations and the governance could be one of the edges that EU can play.
I think the main implication for Europe is that Europe is now far behind. It's far behind China and it's far behind the US. And I think I just spent 3 months in Berlin. There's a sense of quiet panic in the corridors of power in Europe, not only in Brussels, but also in national governments. And I think this is justified. We sort of somehow lost the plot. And I think the next big question is, can we regain the plot? And if we are to regain the plot, then what policy changes do we need in order to get there? But pretty much, if you look across the waterfront, there are a few European companies that are at the cutting edge. I mean, I've mentioned ASML in Eindhoven. I visited there. What an incredible company. Most incredible company I've ever been to. Just unbelievable. But even in this area of basically etching tiny silicon wafers in nearly getting down to the nanometer in scale, there are Chinese competitors coming up. I'm not going to overplay that because the Chinese competitors are mostly doing what's called DUV, which is last generation, and ASML is doing EUV. So, ASML still has a lead, but the speed at which these Chinese competitors have emerged, I'm talking about Naura Technology and SiCarrier. SiCarrier is a company related to Huawei, is dramatic. And therefore, please, Europeans, let us not be complacent about this sector as well, because our response over the last decades has just been, yeah, China's catching up, but it's a mid-technology country. And look where we are now. The dragon is literally on our doorstep. And we need in Europe, I think, to come up with a whole load of policies which relate to building resilience, self-strengthening, a creative, startup capitalism. We need to talk about innovation. We need to prioritize wealth creation, something you almost never hear about in the media in this country. So I think there's a whole overhaul that Europe is facing. And I guess on the good side, because it's getting a little bit depressing, we do have pockets of high tech, and we do have excellent universities, and we do have open capital markets, and America is keen to invest as well. I loved your example of Magsa with the South Koreans, the Americans trying to energize the South Korean shipping industry. But basically, I think Europe has a massive task ahead of it.
Yeah, Robin was very keen on coming on this one as well.
To not repeat, the question is how? How does Europe compete? And I'm looking, I know James, you've written and you think about this a lot. If I think about the model of who the UK and then also EU have followed implicitly, it's been the sort of American Silicon Valley idea of innovation. And part of that is liberal democracy and not wanting to be construed as sort of crony capitalism or corruption, right? You need to have an arm's length with major industrial leaders. The opposite, I suppose, tack or strategy of beating China by being more like China and having the made in China policy that it sort of chooses those gladiatorial entrepreneurs that are then supported has been a sort of morally unattractive one. And I would suggest that in some ways Korea and Japan offer an interesting democracy, version of this where it's saying we clearly have industrial strengths, and that's absolutely true in the continent, right? You have absolute powerhouses across the critical technologies like James mentioned, but across industries, and it's incredible. I do a fair bit of executive education and thinking about German automotive and the sort of desire to compete in EVs and feeling how do we not become obsolete, right? How do we defend our position? How do we innovate? This is at the fore, but then part of the answer is, well, the policy needs to look different. It needs to build on what some initial policies have done from the EU, which is to say, let's approach this by bringing large firms together. Let's encourage corporate venture capital. Let's have startups work with the commanding heights of our economy. And also it's incredible how EU policy has recently started to speak about dual purpose and defense and security as a motivation. And that's new, and I think maybe there's some hope around that in its ability to sort of marshal a whole of system approach, which until even a few years ago was largely missing.
Yeah, I think from this, to sum up the three comments of yours, it's interesting that there are increasing warnings, about Europe and about where Europe is at the moment, and this recognition that something needs to change. I found it encouraging to hear that you see some potential things where Europe can come in on standards and so on. And I found it interesting that there are discussions about what to do about it, from what Robin says. Probably still, early stage still, but obviously recognition of the need that something needs to change, something needs to be done, and a new approach needs to be taken in Europe as well, to be able to match what the others are doing. Shall we do? To come to you with Europe, I mean as well the UK, so entire. Yeah. Shall we do that at the end in the Q&A? Yeah, let's do that in the Q&A.
Real change starts with people, it starts with us. At the AM to PM Wellbeing Service, we're building a platform for grassroots action. When you like, share, and subscribe, you amplify our mission and help us empower communities to build a better future. This is how change happens.